Hola gente, ¿cómo están? Estamos en otro encuentro con el grupo Grite, nuevamente con dos invitados de lujo, nuevamente Pablo Martínez Burquet ayudándonos en la traducción y dando todos sus conocimientos sobre buena literatura de terror. Y tenemos como invitada especial nada menos y nada más que a Ellen Datlow. Si hay una persona que ha ayudado a circular el género del terror fue Ellen Datlow y es Ellen Datlow. Desde sus primeras antologías en las que editaba cuentos de terror con fantasía junto con Kelly Link, pasando a sus nuevas antologías en donde ya edita sola lo mejor del terror del año, Ellen Datlow no solamente preserva el terror literario, sino que además siempre está dando espacio a nuevas voces, new voices, en este mundo cada vez más globalizado y ha presentado muchísima gente nueva. Así que sin mucho más presentación, welcome Ellen Datlow.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Thanks for your time. Pablo.
Yes, Fernando I just summarized what he said, but he pointed your outstanding presence in the realm of the horror genre and the whole fantasy literature. From the beginning of your career today, you really set the boundaries of the horror genre and the other sci-fi and fantasy genre, and not only with the established authors, the winner of many prizes, author, well-known authors, but given the chance to show their works to new voices that right now are best known for the whole fandom of the horror genre. So if we can begin with the first question, Emmanuel, I think you go first, okay?
Sí. Bueno, hello Ellen, how are you? It's a great honor to be talking to you. I'm gonna ask the first question and I'm gonna do it in Spanish. Queríamos preguntarte, Ellen, en torno a tu enorme trayectoria, ¿qué has encontrado en la literatura de género para haberle dedicado toda una vida de trabajo a su edición y difusión? ¿Y qué potencias hallás en esas zonas de la imaginación narrativa?
Okay, Emmanuel said that what had you found in genre literature that has prompted you to dedicate lifetime of work to its editing and dissemination? And what powers do you see in these realms of the narrative imagination?
I think you're kind of asking why I got into the field, yes? Why I decided. Well, I've always been a reader. And as a reader, I didn't know. I went to college for 4 years and I majored in English literature. I didn't know what my options were for actual working. And I thought of getting into publishing or working with a library or working at a bookstore because I wanted to work with books. And I realized working at a bookstore didn't make much money. And so I originally, I started in 1975, actually, my first job in publishing. And I started as an editorial, I actually started as in marketing. I worked for book publishers for a few years, mainstream, non-genre book publishers. I got whatever job I could get. And it wasn't until I worked for several different publishers, getting nowhere, and started doing editorial assistant, where you start reading books. You start reading maybe the slush pile, the unsolicited manuscripts, but they weren't mostly genre. When I was at Holt, Rinehart and Winston, which was a major publisher, that's when I actually started reading more genre. I mean, I always read it for fun, but reading it professionally. There was one editor there who acquired and edited Robert Sheckley and J.G. Ballard material. And I started working a little bit with him, although he was not my boss. And at that time, this would have been 1978, maybe, I also started reading for the Science Fiction Book Club and for, excuse me, for a few different book publishers, like Dell published science fiction. So, I mean, I was always interested in it. But initially, I didn't want to work in science fiction because I was afraid it would pigeonhole me. Do you know what that word is?
Yes.
I'm afraid I was afraid I'd get stuck
Perfectly.
being just that. All right. So that's why I started in mainstream publishing. And also back in that time, in 1975, there weren't that many science fiction books being published, novels. They were first published in magazines, in serials, okay? So I wanted to actually learn how to edit. And once something's published, you don't edit it. So I avoided the field changed so much between 75 and like in 20 years. But initially, there wasn't much original science fiction being published. As they said, it first came out in serials and magazines, all right? So anyway, let me skip ahead to OMNI. I mean, OMNI was my first job in the genre. It was my first magazine job. It just started up. I think the first issue was October 78, and I actually heard about it from one of my former jobs, the editor who was editing J.G. Ballard and Robert Sheckley for Holt. And he said, there's this new magazine, why don't you apply for a job there? So I did, and it was, I just kind of nagged my way into a job because Ben Bova was the fiction editor there. And he didn't have an assistant, he had a secretary. And the difference was the secretary didn't know anything about the field, she just did secretarial work. And I kind of pushed him and say, hey, hire me, I love science fiction. And it was mostly science fiction. And OMNI, so I was hired as an assistant fiction editor. And Ben Bova was promoted to the overall editor of the magazine, and Robert Sheckley became the fiction editor. Robert Sheckley was, I assume you know who he was. He was a really good writer, mostly comic writer, but I don't think he ever worked in an office. He knew nothing about how offices worked, how publishing worked. So I was able to learn on the job. Most assistants don't read all the material that comes in. They usually pass it all on to their boss. But because neither Bob nor I knew how it worked, I was able to read everything that came in, including, Bill Gibson's first stories and everything. So I learned a lot more on the job than I would have if I was working for someone who knew what they were doing, basically. So, and I was promoted to editor. I mean, Bob left around 1980 or so, and I was made interim fiction editor and then made the fiction editor. Now, initially, we were not supposed to publish fantasy or horror in OMNI. It was mostly science fiction. But then as time went by, I was able to acquire more fantasy for sure, and then some horror. But initially, I was not able to buy certain stories I wanted to. Like, I don't know if any of you have read George R.R. Martin's The Monkey Treatment. I don't know if you ever heard of it, but it's this horror story that he wrote years ago. And I wanted to take that for OMNI, but Ben wouldn't let me because, oh no, it's horror. You can't publish that. So I don't know. Are you all understanding this? I mean, are you going to translate? Do you need to translate it?
No.
No.
Perfectly.
So anyway, that's kind of how I got it.
The guys understand pretty well.
And I wasn't doing much horror. What happened is at OMNI, we published maybe 2 or 3 or 4 stories a month of fiction, and everything else was nonfiction or art and science oriented. But as time went on, there were fewer stories being published in OMNI. So I got bored, and someone who I worked with had an idea that, oh, I've talked to these book publishers, they want to do a series of anthologies, pitch me some ideas for theme anthologies. And what I did is I pitched something that became Alien Sex, which is one of my earliest anthologies. And
Yes.
It's Not Enough, my first vampirism anthology. And I pitched those because what I did is I picked stories that I had turned down for Omni that I couldn't take because they were either too sexual or too horror oriented. Sorry. This should help. And those were the germs, those were reprints. And then I figured I'd acquire new stories. And by doing, I was afraid of a conflict of interest. I didn't want to work with stories that I could have bought for Omni. I would have gotten in trouble. But anyway, he never sold the anthologies, but then I did. I got an agent and she sold those 2 anthologies. So that's kind of how I got into horror. Excuse me. I always read it. I mean, I loved it. I read Ray Bradbury. I read Matheson. I read mostly short stories. I read a lot of Harlan Ellison when I was a kid, and Lovecraft. But I didn't work in it. The reason I worked in it was I thought it wouldn't be a conflict of interest with my job at Omni. So that's really kind of how I got into editing horror, although I always loved it. So I don't know if that all kind of comes together.
Yeah, absolutely. If my colleagues allow me, I would like to introduce a question related to this overview that you have gave us about your work during the decade. So, in your extensive experience curating horror anthologies, how do you perceive the balance between traditional horror tropes and innovative storytelling in maintaining the genre vitality? How, through
When
the
I
many
edit something?
years of your experience, the early 70s tropes and before, and the nowadays tropes of horror, how do you, what is your opinion if they have changed and how or not?
Oh boy, that's complicated. As I said, I mostly read short stories. I read some of the classic horror novels, but I was mostly a short story reader. And I started reading for a year's best around 1988, I think was the first year's best fantasy and horror. Terry
Yes.
Windling picked the fantasy and I picked the horror. So I really can only judge. I mean, yes, I read the pan books of horror. I don't remember if that's what they were called, but I read a lot of trashy. A lot of it was very pulpy early
Yeah.
on. But they were always really good writers. I mean, like Richard Matheson wrote beautiful material, and not only horror. I mean, he wrote wonderful stories, and Charles Beaumont. I mean, there were people who were always writing really high, I hate to call it high end, but literate literature. I mean, that was horror literature. But then there was always, at the time, I mean, there's H.P. Lovecraft people who, his circle that were very pulpy and they're monsters. And people were doing that all the time, but they were also, some other writers were writing psychological horror that was not necessarily supernatural. So it was always going on. And when I started reading for the year's best, the difference that I perceived I've been doing this like 40 something years, the year's best, is a change in demographics. I mean, there are many more women writing horror now. And that has been, you can see that in my table of contents. For the year's best fantasy and horror, Terry picked the fantasy, and most of the fantasy were written by women writers, and I picked the horror. And if you go back those years, you'll see most of my horror stories that I picked were by men. And that changed. It changed gradually, and then it kind of exploded. Since I've been doing the best horror of the year, which I'm about to start reading for number 18, definitely many more women writers are writing horror, and people of color. And also people from other countries are starting to get translated here. You know, there are some very interesting writers from Central America and Latin America. I assume you've read Tender is the Flesh or know about it,
Yeah.
which is pretty horrific.
Yes.
You know, by Augustin, I can't pronounce her last name, but something B.A.
Mariana Enriquez.
Yeah,
Agustina Basterrica.
Mariana Enriquez, I don't consider most of her stuff horror. It's dark, and I consider it more dark fantasy. See, I mean, that's the other thing. When I'm looking at a year's best, I have to distinguish between what I consider horror and what I consider dark fantasy.
No, excuse me. Tender is the flesh is the Agustina Basterrica.
Yes, exactly. Right. Yes.
Sorry. Yes, Tender the Flesh.
Yeah, and that novel is just amazing. And her collection is interesting too, but the novel is what really hits you, you know. And Mariana Enriquez writes, to me, she writes more, as I said, fantasy and dark fantasy. She's sometimes considered a horror writer, but I haven't read a lot of her work, but a lot of it I don't feel is horror. And if you want me to try to define the differences, I can try, you know, in my opinion, what the difference is between horror and do you even have that discussion where you live? Yeah.
Oh,
what
yes,
dark
indeed.
fantasy is and what horror is?
I could, you know, I could spend the whole day trying to separate the ships from the,
I know,
you
right.
know.
I mean, but I mean, I have to do it when I'm doing the best of the year. With other anthologies, when I edit an anthology, an original anthology, I can mix it up. I mean, I can have a dark fantasy story that isn't what I consider horror. And to me, the horror isn't the supernatural aspect, it's the tone of the way of the story, how it's told, and the denouement, what happens to the people at the end who are left. It's not you know, that to me is what makes it horror versus dark fantasy, not whether it's supernatural or not.
Let me share with you.
Sorry.
No, let me share with you a little gossip about Tender the Flesh. Agustina is a friend of mine. You know, the horror writers over here is quite a small group of.
Please tell her I love that book.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will tell you. A small group of Wacos, you know, people.
Mm-hmm.
And Agustina is a very friend of mine from before she earned the prize and from the novel. And she is vegan or something like that. So it was funny because she was trying to make a statement about veganism, not a horror novel. And, you know, publishers and critics and whatever, readers label Tender the Flesh as a horror. But at the first, it was in the good sense of the word, a pamphlet with about veganism or something like that, to aware people who eats animals like many of Argentinians. You know, we got the meat, one of the best meats, beef in the whole world. She tried to aware us what would happen backwards. So it was funny because she always thought she wrote in some sense political statement.
Well, a lot of horror is political, whether you believe it initially or not. And she can't.
But you know, this thing that you previously asked if we have discussed that, we all the time discuss the nature of the horror in this kind of books, on this kind of author, because people in a sense of tradition of the horror genre which include myself,
Mhm.
in some way, no rejects, but we are now consider this quite horror itself, in a sense that the traditional horrors. Of course, with an open mind, we accept all there is no boundaries for
Mhm.
horror, so is well received much coming from a friend of mine.
Right. I don't know. I just want to
So
bring, I just wanted to bring up another story about cannibalism. I don't know if you read Dale Bailey's The Dinner Party. I think it's called The Dinner Party. But Dale Bailey wrote a story about an alternate kind of Victorian time where people have big dinners and it's about cannibalism. And it's very political, but it's all, I mean, not all, but most is political. I mean, everything you write has a political point of view, usually,
yeah,
unless it's very lightweight, and even then sometimes.
yeah. It's quite the same. I could agree. Well, sorry, guys, for my interruption, but I have to ask this question. So the next, Emiliano, if you please, shoot.
Sí, muchas gracias, Pablo. Usted
Emiliano, Emiliano,
It's
we having
breaking
problem
up.
with your mic.
Se te
Tenemos problemas con tu
escucha,
micrófono.
se te escucha muy mal. ¿Podés,
Maybe you can put in the chat.
querés que la haga yo,
No, lo puedo
Pablo?
traducir yo.
Sí,
O
sí.
Dale.
Dale. La pregunta es de Emiliano y él preguntaba, usted dijo en un prefacio, exactamente en The Del Rey Book of Sci-Fi and Fantasy, que un relato corto es el espacio ideal para que un autor encuentre su voz, su estilo, su forma de estructurar un relato. Sin embargo, hay autores que se mueven mejor en el campo de la novela. ¿Piensa usted que es una cuestión personal de cada escritor o sencillamente hay estilos que no pueden trasladarse bien a un cuento corto?
It's a very good question. Let me translate. Emiliano said that you said in the preface of the Ray Book of Sci-Fi and Fantasy that a short story is the ideal space for an author to find their voice, style, and way of structuring a story. However, many authors thrive on long-form writing, such a novel. Do you think it is a personal matter for each writer, or are there simply styles that cannot be translated or developed well in a short story?
Okay, I don't think it's a style. I think it's how much you want to say, what you want to express. And not everyone can write short stories or novels. I mean, yes, I think short stories are wonderful for experimentation, but I've taught a lot of workshops, and you can't force someone to write a short story. Some people just don't have that in them, and that's fine. And other people are really short story writers and shouldn't write novels, but sometimes they're forced because of marketing, because their publisher or their agent says you have to write a novel or you can't continue. But some people like Ted Chiang write wonderful short stories and novellas. And I don't know if anyone's even if someone pressures him, he won't do it. He'll do what he wants to. So, I mean, I think what determines the length is how much you have to say in a particular word length. It's not style. It's obviously a novel is differently structured than a short story. I am not a novel editor. I am not great on structure. I mean, I edit up to novellas, and a long novella is harder for me to edit because I'm not used to it. It's different. It's a whole different beast. It's much larger. It's more complex. And I don't have that. It's not, I don't have the ability, I don't have the experience editing novels. You know, I have edited, I've worked with Jonathan Carroll and Paul McCauley, but their novels were very clean. They didn't need structural work. You know, if they need, I mean, I could have, we were offered, Tour.com was offered Stephen Graham Jones is the Only Good Indians, and I knew that I couldn't edit it because it's a novel, and I just don't have the ability or the knowledge enough to be able to figure out what's wrong with the structure. So there are different forms, and I think it's not the style that matters, it's what's in it, it's what's in the material. And if you can't write a short story, if every short story you write starts getting longer and longer, then maybe you're not a short story writer. But the good thing about the short story, of course, is you can get more of them out there. If you can do both, it's great. Because while you're working on a novel, you have stories out there so people don't forget who you are. If you're writing a novel for 2 or 3 years, you know, it's going to take time for it to get published even once you write it. So that's one of the advantages of being able to write good short stories that are also published. But if you can't force yourself to do it. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yes, you probably know that over here in the south end of the continent, we have a very large tradition of short stories. Like, you know, we have many well-known authors, starting by Borges, Bioy Casares, Cortázar, and all of
I
them.
published Cortázar. I published one of his stories in OMNI.
Oh, good. Which one? May I ask?
I'm trying to
you?
remember. I'd have to look it up. It was
Don't
very
worry, don't worry.
pretty
It's okay.
short. If I remember, I'll look it up later. I
And
believe it was Cortázar. I published one story by it, like in the first 3 or 4 years I was working there. And I
And
think I wrote Borges, but he never responded.
yeah,
I used to write. I mean, when I was starting out, I mean, at OMNI, I just put out feelers. I mean, I just wrote to people. I mean, that's how I got Joyce Carol Oates to write for me. I just wrote to her agent. I got William Burroughs. I got a story by William Burroughs, you know, and I just wrote to all these people. And apparently someone had my correspondence is in England, and a friend of mine was going through it. I haven't looked at it in, like, 40 years. And he said, did Borges ever, was it Borges or Marquez? I think it might have been it might have been Gabriel Garcia Marquez, not Borges. But I wrote to him and he said, did he ever respond? I said, no.
yes, and but it's funny because for besides a writer and a lawyer, so for one reason I used to travel a lot to the States, and when it comes out that I am a writer, they ask, what do you write? Horror. Oh, horror. And what kind of writing do you do? Short stories. Short stories? Oh, like saying, no, so you are not a real writer. And it's funny because if you don't write a novel, it seems like you are not getting your prom off.
You're not taken seriously.
Excuse me, like a writer. And it's funny because the American horror realm was founded, just to name a few, over the short stories of Edgar Allan Poe or the same H.P. Lovecraft and the whole Lovecraft circle. But it seems like in the States, the novel is most prestigious that the short stories. So when I found your work in the shelves of the bookstores, short stories. Well, that's
You can do it. You can do it.
yeah.
And there are a lot,
So,
and all the time there are new markets opening and closing. You know, there are new markets. I'm just cleaning up my summary for 2024, going and looking at all the horror magazines and webzines that are around. There have been a lot. There are a lot of new ones.
yeah.
And do you write in? Can you write in English, or does everything need to be translated?
Me, myself, yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I write both.
Do you submit to North American markets?
Well,
You
I
should.
had been,
Why not?
I'm just starting a couple of months ago, Asimov and so on.
Mm-hmm. What about the rest of you? Do you all write horror and write stories or?
No,
Ustedes escriben y han,
nosotros somos
I do, but
académicos.
not in English. Oh, sorry, perdón.
¿qué?
Nosotros somos académicos y básicamente leemos todo. Yo escribo en inglés, pero es académico y todas las historias las leo en inglés. Tengamos en cuenta también que esto es Argentina y llega muy poquito publicado en castellano. De hecho, no sé qué hay publicado en castellano de Ellen Datlow. No sé si hay una antología de ella en castellano. Creo que no.
As far as I know, no.
No.
Fernando say, these three guys over here are members of the faculty. So they are scholars. So even though they write or in
Fiction?
English,
En English.
in the case, yes, they write, we could say, literature criticism, not
Fiction.
so
Ficción.
not fiction. They write non-fiction instead of fiction. That's
Well, there
my
are
case,
markets for
fiction.
that too. I mean, there are definitely markets in America, in North America, that want criticism from other countries.
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
we know.
Sí, de hecho, todos mis escritos,
The other thing is,
todos mis escritos académicos se publican justamente en Estados Unidos. Acá prácticamente no hay mercado.
Fernando say that the whole academic articles that he wrote had been published in America because is the target market of his writing. And the other thing that she said that is quite difficult for us to get access to the genre author or genre anthologies, like in your case, in translated to Spanish. They are all in English, so many of us read in English because the books are not translated yet.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's totally up to publishers, you know. I have no control over that.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I've had anthologies translated into different language over time. I mean, you just never know. I mean, in the early 80s, the Japanese bought a lot of my anthologies, and then they stopped. I guess they didn't do that well.
Well, our next question is from Emmanuel.
Sí. Bueno, la siguiente pregunta es, Ellen, ¿solés decir que como editora sos una gatekeeper, como una guardiana en la puerta, y que no todo puede pasar? Y la pregunta sería, ¿qué tiene que tener una historia para que la dejes ingresar y cómo manejás los rechazos?
All right. It's a very good question. Emmanuel said that you often emphasize that your role as an editor is kind of like a gatekeeper who carefully selects the stories that can be accepted. In this understanding, what criteria does a story have to meet for you to consider it? And how do you manage the delicate task of rejecting a submission?
Okay, well, don't forget, there are different kinds of work I do. I do, the best of the year is all reprints. So all the stories have been published, and I try to be aware of all the venues, all the places where these stories are published. So in that sense, the writer might not even know I'm looking at their story. You know, if I look at Nightmare, I read those stories, and if I like something, I'll mark it down, and then and it's a process where I read and reread because I can only publish a certain amount of words in the best of the year. But for other things like original anthologies or reprint anthologies, what I do for reprint anthologies that are themed, like I just finished one called Lovecraft's Brood, that is cosmic horror, and I contact whatever writers I know who I think have written cosmic horror that might have stories. And I'll say, hey, I'm doing this anthology. It's a reprint anthology, all reprints on cosmic horror. Do you have something recent? You can send me up to 3 stories. I don't want tentacles. I want, you know, cosmic horror, though, not the mythos. and not overly reprinted. And you can send me up to 3 stories. So for that anthology, I got in. Stop it. I'm sorry, my cat's bothering me. Hang on. I can tell you how many stories I got in for that. Hang on. I read about 150 stories for that that people sent me and picked, I forget how many, 20 or something. But original anthologies, okay, when I was at Omni, I had a reader, you know, and I had a slush pile. So, you know, all the hundreds of manuscripts came in, but I had someone read them for me and pass them on to me. As an anthologist, I don't have someone like that. So I don't have an open market. You know, I don't say, hey, anyone, I'm doing this anthology and such, everyone send me a story. I don't do that. Because I just don't have the time and energy to read hundreds of stories for every original anthology I do. So I basically contact people who I've worked with or whose work I like and admire, who I've maybe published in a year's best. This year, for number 17, I published 13 writers who I never had published in a year's best before. A couple of them, I never even heard of their names. I never heard of them. Now, in the past, I have occasionally asked people like that to write me a new story. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. You know, it's like just because someone writes one story that I love doesn't mean they're going to write more stories that I love. So in that sense, yes, I'm a gatekeeper. Every editor has to be a gatekeeper. I mean, you can't publish everything you receive. If you do, you're not an editor. You know, and with all the original stories, of course, I edit them. You know, I have to work with them, with the author on them. Some writers send me material that's pretty clean. I mean, Stephen Graham Jones writes a lot. Now he sends me stories. And John Langan writes stories for me, but sometimes they're long. Usually they're long, and also he's always late. So his stories may need more work because he didn't give it a second or third read, you know, so I have to work with him on that. So that in that sense, yes, all editors are gatekeepers to some extent. In the past, I have done a few original anthologies. I've co-edited with people. Like I did an HWA anthology with Lisa Morton on Halloween, about Halloween. And we had openings for about 5 or 6 stories that were not what we had solicited. And so we had people reading from HWA. They volunteered, no names or anything, it was blind submissions. They read, like, I don't know how many stories they got in, maybe say 100 or 50, and they passed 20 on to us, or 25. And we chose stories from that. But usually, and Nick Mamitas always wants to have, when I've worked with him on Supernatural, no, not on that, but Haunted Legends, I think it was called. Which was an urban legend anthology. He wanted to have an open market for like a month or 2 weeks or something. So during that period of time, he got all these. I said, okay, but you have to read them all and pass the good ones on to me, which he did. And I think, interestingly, even though we got all these stories from a bunch of stories from people, which was an open call, I don't know if I think there maybe have been one story by a writer we didn't know the name of, who we never knew, which is unfortunate. You know, we were looking for new writers, but none of them were good enough to take for the book. So, yes, when that happens, I'll say, sure, but I'm not reading them all. I'll read 25 of the 500 that come in. I'm not reading the 500 stories. And the other problem with having an open call is that then you have, if it's on a theme anthology, then you have all these rejected stories about the theme, and it kind of, I don't know, it kind of dilutes the whole idea of the book. So that's the other issue with having an open call. But no, I think an open call is good because it does bring in new writers. I feel that because I do a year's best, I'm open to new writers because I see everything that's out there. So it's not totally maybe new writers, but I'm seeing a lot of people who have only published maybe one or two stories just because they're in this magazine I'm reading now. Nightmare Abbey is a newish magazine, and they have some good stories. Deadlands has good stories. And so sometimes I see the same writers over and over again, and they're pretty good. They're not, I don't want to say perfect. They're not exactly what I want, but they're good enough that it will give them an honorable mention. And maybe at some point I'll think they're good enough. I like their work enough that I might ask them for an original story. But that maybe take a while. I'm not sure that answers the question.
Yes, yes.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, I mean, I wish if I had more, I do have readers for the year's best. I have people reading. I have someone in Washington State who reads ebooks and e-magazines for me with most of the stories that I look at the table of contents. I don't recognize the names, and they'll read for me and then pass on the best stories, what they think. And that recently, for the first time, I took a story from the Horrorzine, which is an online website that's been published for I don't know how many 20 years. And she passed on one story, and I took it for the year's best, and it's the first time I ever took one from them. So you have to trust your readers. And the other one, I have a reader in New York who I give like magazines like Asimov's and Analog and the mystery magazines, because I don't think there'll be any horror in there, but they have to, if they find it, they have to show it to me and say, hey, here's some horror. Oh, by the way, here's my next book coming out. This is Day and Night, coming out in the fall from Saga. It's a flip book.
Oh.
Like an old Ace double. Yeah.
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 Great. Thank you very much for sharing.
It's very cool, except this is my one of the arcs. I got two of them. The first one was screwed up. Let me see if this is the right one or the wrong one. Okay, hold on. It was Day. Oh, this is the screwed up one. It's upside down. Here's correct. Luckily they didn't send it out to any reviewers. I'll show you what they did. Okay. Here's Night. And this was supposed to be, it's backwards and upside down. So they had to withdraw all of them and redo it. No. But anyway, it's beautiful, isn't it? And that's
I like this kind of work, publishing work that try to mix the things and change.
An experiment. Yeah.
I usually remember she passed away too young. The art world designer of the publisher of mine, not mine, who published me, and she said that the art in general is what made you change your point of view. And this kind of stuff is around the idea of changing your point of view.
Terry Carr's Ace doubles. These are based on those in the early 70s or 60s. They did Ace, and one book on one side and the other on the little paperbacks. And then they did another. I mean, so this is what that is emulating. And I have two Stephen Graham Jones novellas, I think, coming out like that first. I forget what. They're doing a series of books like this. And hopefully they'll work out, that people will like them. They're fun.
All right.
As long as I get them right. As long as I don't screw them up. Like they did that one initially.
I promise I will next time I'm over there in the States, I will get my own book of yours and let you know.
Or if you're in New York, let me know. We can get together.
Oh, I spend the most of part of my time over there in New York. So
If any of you come to New York, say hi.
All right, good. I promise. Well, next
Bueno,
one,
Pablo,
Emiliano.
Pablo, nos vamos a saltear la siguiente pregunta que era de Emiliano, porque ya la contestó, y pasamos
Yes.
directamente a Emanuel.
Yes. Okay. Emmanuel, your time.
Bueno, desde fines de los 80, Ellen editás anualmente la antología de lo mejor del horror del año, y en base a ese trabajo queríamos preguntarte en qué pensás que los relatos de horror y fantástico se han transformado con el paso del tiempo y con el pasaje al siglo XXI.
Okay. Emmanuel said that since the late 80s, you have published an annual anthology of the best horror stories.
Mm.
How do you think horror or fantasy stories have transformed over time and into the 21st century?
I'm not sure they've changed all that much. People ask me that. I mean, there are different voices, but I think the actual content. Okay, at a certain point, remember, there are a lot of zombie anthologies, like so many zombie anthologies, and zombies were all over the place. And it's like, I don't ever want to read another zombie story. And then you find one story that is a zombie story that's just brilliant. So it doesn't matter. So the tropes remain the same. You still have monsters who are effective. It's the way that they're written about, the point of view, who's telling the story, where the story takes place. But as far as the content, I can't say it has changed that much. I mean, I have different tastes. Like now, if I read one of my early anthologies, one of the best of the year, I'm not sure how I'd feel about the stories. I don't know. I'm not sure if my idea of what horror is has changed. I'd have to go back, and I don't have time to read the early stories. And there are stories that people say, what are your favorite stories? And I'll say, there's ones I reprint all the time. I mean, there are certain stories that I've gone back that I published either originally or I used in a year's best or something that I love, and I use them whenever I can because I love those stories. But the idea that the content has changed. Well, I guess there are more less binary characters. I mean, a lot in the last 3 or 4 years in novels, as much and more than anything else. I'm reading a lot more novels about non-binary characters, about transgender people. There's been an attempt to be more inclusive in the kinds of characters, and I think that's good. But as far as the content, it stays the same. What's interesting to me, okay, I get releases from all these book publishers in email saying, here's a new book about blah, 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 blah. And I look at them, it's like, I don't want to read this. It's the same. I mean, the thing is, it's not fair to the book, but the way they describe them, it's like, oh, it's another Gothic where someone's going to a haunted house and the sisters, blah, blah, blah. It's like, I don't want to read that. So I'm actually finding horror novels boring. I mean, that's why I pick very few horror novels to read for my year's best. I just don't have the time. And then a lot of them just don't interest me. I mean, it's more, the short stories to me are more inventive and more interesting. It's like, the problem with novels, here's the problem with novels. Once a novel hits big, every other publisher wants to do another novel like that, Gothic, folk horror. It's like, oh yeah, it's got to be all this stuff now, these novels. Now, and I think it works better as a short story because you can have a lot of different voices in an anthology of short Gothic fiction or short folk horror because it can take place in different places. But in a novel, you're stuck. You're stuck in one venue or one country or one city or one town. With a story, it doesn't matter because it's only 5,000 words. So I'm not sure. So that's I guess I'm finding the novels really boring, most of them these days. So I don't know if that's a change. That may be me. I mean, maybe I'm getting too jaded, but I just am finding short stories much more interesting to read, the horror short stories. I read
Yes.
a handful of horror novels that I really like, and then the rest are like, ugh, not that again. It's like, no, I don't want to read it. I'll mention it in my year's best. But as far as the content of short fiction or any fiction, as I said, the novel is more a victim of trends, and that's not short fiction isn't. And I
Yeah.
think that's why short
Yes.
fiction is
Yes.
always better in horror.
Besides, I would like to add, if I may, that when you write a novel, it's like you have a machine gun. Instead, when you write a short story, you have one arrow, and that's how go
Well, yes, but
make.
you can have, but it can be a deep arrow. It can be deep though. It can be just as deep as a novel. It can be deeper. I mean, there are more interpretations and even a short story. I mean, my favorite short stories are ones that I feel comfortable I can read over and over again because I get something new out of them. Um, they can, even if there's 5,000 words, you can embed more layers than you think in a really great short story. And with
Yeah.
I mean, I've always, people who are short story editors say novels are too long. They should be not, they should be short stories. Cut it, cut, cut, cut. And people who are novel editors say, oh no, it's too abrupt, keep writing.
Yeah.
So it might be taste as much as anything else.
Yeah. Indeed. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Who's next, guys?
Emiliano,
Emiliano?
voy a hablar yo. La pregunta de Emiliano, y es, en la introducción a la antología Little Deaths, usted dice que cada antología que edita va transmutando a medida que va leyendo los relatos, hasta volverse algo diferente. ¿Hasta qué punto permite usted que la idea original de esa colección cambie?
Okay. Let's see if I can translate the question because it's so deep. In the introduction of the anthology Little Death, you say that each anthology you publish transforms as you read the stories until it becomes something different.
Mhm.
To what extent do you allow the original idea for that collection to change?
Wow, you're getting to old anthologies where I haven't read my intros for decades, but that's interesting. Yes, it's true. Well, when I do a theme anthology, I actually prefer non-theme anthologies, but they don't sell as well, so publishers always want theme anthologies. I always try to keep the theme as flexible as possible. And basically, when someone submits a story, if I can justify it to myself and say, yeah, that fits the theme, and I love the story, I'll take it. Now, the evolution of theme, it's not way off from where it began, but it may be just different. Let me think about Little Deaths. I mean, I don't remember it's so long ago that Little Deaths was commissioned. I don't remember it was intended to be erotic horror, but it turned out to be not erotic at all. To me, it became sexual horror and definitely different. Okay, Alien Sex, for example, was the second anthology I ever that was half original. And actually, that was not my title. We called it the Alien Sex Anthology, and when it sold, the publisher said, "Oh no, we love that title," but it's not about sex; it's about gender. And the publisher sometimes changes the thrust of or the title in a way that may not represent what I think the book is about. For example, this follow-up to Little Deaths was oh my God, I can't remember. Well, it's supposed to be Revenge and Vengeance, but it turned out to be it's like no, it has to be. What I can't remember the title of my book. I'll have to look it up. But it was a sequel to Little Deaths, and it was published by England. I'm blank. I cannot believe it. But I wanted to call it something else because it's basically not, it is not erotic, but because Little Deaths did well. And Little Deaths to me, yeah, it has a little bit of eroticism, but it was about sex, not erotic, which is quite different. Well, can be quite different.
Absolutely.
So the book, the follow-up, whatever the heck it's called, was meant to be Vengeance and Revenge. And they put a sexy cover on it and a sexy title, which I'm blanking on. And it drove me nuts. And it never sold to America. I mean, it's finally now as an ebook. Now you can get it as an ebook. And it's called whatever the title. I can't believe I can't remember the title. It'll come to me. But so sometimes, with alien sex, to me, that was never about sex. It was always about gender. And some of the stories are very dated. I mean, it sells as an ebook now, and sometimes I'm able to do new bios, but it's still an old book. It was from 1989, and half the stories were reprints from the 60s. The rest of them were new, but I'm still trying to think of the title of that book. But so anyway, it depends. I mean, in that way, did it evolve? No, that in a sense did not evolve because I never thought it was going to be erotic. And I never really intended it to be about sex. It was always to be about gender, and the relationship between genders, at the time. So when I say that a book evolves, well, when I'm doing a reprint anthology for the year's best, sometimes I'll say, oh, well, these stories are about this. And I have to be careful with the year's best or anything that I don't have too many stories that are similar, like too many stories about children being threatened, so at a certain point, I mean, what I do when I do any anthology, whether it's reprint or original, I'll periodically go back to my authors who I've asked for stories and say, what's your story about? How's it coming along? What's it about? And Terry and I did one of our anthologies, it was a YA anthology. I think it was about dystopia. And we got most of the stories in and I started editing them. I usually don't do a final line edit till maybe a few months before the book's due. And I started doing a line edit and I realized something. I'll tell you what in a minute. So I contacted the people who hadn't written stories yet, Garth Nix, who was very reliable. And I said, what point of view is your story from? He said, why? Did you get all first person? And apparently, yes, that's what I got. Apparently, YA is very much first person, which I never realized before. I did lots of other YA books, but only this one, I realized all the stories were. He said, well, it is first person, but it doesn't read like it. I said, okay. So sometimes you realize something when you started editing, by then it's a little late if you have all the stories in. But if you have only some of the stories in and start to edit, you suddenly realize, oh my God, I need something else. I need this, or I have something similar to this. When I did my Poe anthology, I did an anthology of stories inspired by Poe. I asked in advance what people were going to use of Poe's. So I got I got like 3 House of Usher stories, or Mask of the Red Death, but I knew they'd be completely different because the writers were completely different. And I asked a couple of people who I didn't even think were interested in Poe, and someone I had maybe mentioned it. And Delia Sherman said, oh, I'd like to write a Poe story. I said, really? And she wrote a good horror story, Poe-like. And Glenn Hirschberg used a piece of a news item about Poe in a nonfiction news item and created a story from that. So it depends on what you get in. And once you get stories in, you start to feel, okay, I need to ask for something else here, a different point of view. So in that sense, yeah, I mean, anthologies are always evolving as you work on them.
Good. Okay, Next one.
Bien.
Far away, guys.
Sigue Emiliano. Una cosita que quisiera aclarar. Alien Sex has been published in Spanish in the 90s as Sexo Alienígena. Pero es una antología de Ellen Datlow que tenemos la suerte de tener en español. Segunda.
Excuse me, Ellen. Have you understood what he said?
No,
The sex.
that it's been published in Spanish.
Yeah.
But what's the question?
Yeah, no, it's not a question. It's just to.
Oh no, I probably knew that. What's interesting, it's in Italian and they illustrated it.
Oh.
Let me see if and it's really funny because hold on, let me see if by Monero. I mean, they're cartoon illustrated. Let me see if I can find a copy of the book really quickly. If I just have it around. And it's hilarious. Yeah, maybe not. It may not be easy to find. All right, I don't know where it is, but each story is illustrated literally, like Man of Steel, Woman of Kleenex, which is about what happens if Lois Lane and Superman have sex. It has a flying Superman and her standing there. I mean, it's like ridiculous, but it's sold like hotcakes. So now, and I found the title of the book that I wanted to remember, Lethal Kisses, which was not about sex. It was about revenge and vengeance, but they insisted on calling it Lethal Kisses. It's like, oh no.
Good.
So yes, I have no control over the covers. However, when a book has a Stephen King story in it, he has in his contracts, his name cannot be bigger than anyone else's on the cover. And I think it was a German copy of one of my books that had a story by him in it, and they put his name really big, and they had to withdraw the copy. They had to donate money and apologize because I mean, I had no control over it. I said, oh my God, and he was really pissed off.
Yeah. Yes. Well, next one. Emiliano?
Bien, pregunto yo por Emiliano, por sus problemas con el audio. En una entrevista al sitio Weird Little Wars, esperemos que sea cierto, usted menciona que posee muchas colecciones de objetos. ¿Podría explayarse sobre qué vínculo encuentra o habría entre estas colecciones, o usted como coleccionista de objetos, y su labor como antologista y creadora?
Okay. It seems like in an interview in Weird Little Wars website, you mentioned that your own many collections of objects or artifacts.
Mm-hmm.
Could you elaborate on the connection between these collections and what I'm about and your work as editor and creator?
That's interesting. I had never thought of it before. Chris Barzak, who did the interview? Was that Chris Barzak? Chris Barzak is a writer. He's a YA writer, and he stayed at my apartment a lot, my old apartment in here. And he's the one who realized, all the collections you have are kind of curated in a similar way to you editing books. And it never occurred to me. But yes, I have many collections, unfortunately. I have, let me see if I can turn the computer a little bit. I don't know if I can turn it enough. There it is. You can see I have a whole thing filled with, I collect tools, I collect art glass, I collect skulls. I was collecting skulls, I stopped collecting them. And net skis until they weren't, you're not supposed to get ivory anymore. I have Kokisha dolls on top, which there. Art, my cat.
Yeah.
So yes, and I collect also, I did. I mean, these are things that I did collect that I don't need anymore. When I moved, I realized how many glass bottles I had. I hadn't realized how many little glass bottles I had until I moved. And then I found boxes full. I said, oh my God. And they're all on my, you can't see it. They're on my windowsill over my air conditioner, a lot of them. And I collect many different weird things. Most recently, oh, I got this when I was in Spain, in Zaragoza. But I don't collect them. I mean, I only have one of her. But someone got me, Pat Cadigan got me this one. Yeah, so I mean, it's like I love my art. I mean, I love looking at it. You know, I have things, I have a lot of Alice in Wonderland stuff. I have a lot of Alice in Wonderland art, some by the same person. You see the White Rabbit and the Mad Hatter. Those are by the guy named Barry Moser. And then there's one of the dodos is by him. And you know, unfortunately I still buy things and I shouldn't because I have no room for them. Yeah. Um, but it's all form. I mean, it's not like, oh yeah, blah. You know, I'm just going to throw these all over the place. I have in the past collected them because I loved how they looked. I loved what they did, how I liked them in my apartment. I collect a lot of little dolls. I collected three-headed dolls, you know, three-faced dolls. They're,
Yeah.
I don't know if you know those, where you turn the head and it's crying, laughing, and well, eBay was my downfall. Okay, once eBay started, I bought everything. I mean, I bought every salt and pepper shaker. I bought every, you know, and I bought every three-faced doll. And there are only actually about 5 different types made of plastic, rubber, composite, porcelain. And I finally stopped when I ordered one that was 4 feet tall. I didn't realize it. And it's like, what the hell is this? And that was the last time I ever ordered a three-faced doll. It's like, okay, I'm done. I have to get rid of this thing. So, you know, it's like, yeah, it's partly obsession and partly, you know, doll heads. I have a lot of doll heads. They're things that I've loved, and thank God I stopped collecting them mostly because I don't have room for anything else. Now when I still love antiquing. I love going to antique malls. And I say if it's small, cheap, and weird, I want it. Oh, I collect tools. I collect really weird tools. But they have to be small. Yeah. So, but the connection, obviously there's some connection, but in my brain, but I don't know where it comes from. But yes, organizing. And I'm a photographer. I mean, I love photography and I love photographs. Um, but I'm not a writer. I could not create something out of nothing. But the idea of moving things around, of buying things and having them move around is the same as editing a piece of work. I can edit it, but I can't create it. So in that sense, it's very similar.
Mhm. Good. I thought you got a collection like, filmmaker Guillermo del Toro that have kind of a museum of horror pieces.
No, I don't have room for that. No, I have some masks though. No, mine are smaller. No, I don't have full size monsters or anything like that. No, I don't collect monsters at all. No, I collect other things than monsters.
Pablo,
Good,
¿podrías
good.
preguntarle si ha publicado alguna de sus fotografías en algún libro o las ha expuesto?
Fernando wants to know that if you publish your photograph or you make some kind of exhibition or something like that.
Decades ago, in the 70s, like before I got into book publishing, I actually joined a group called Women Photographers of New York, and we had 1 or 2 exhibitions. I used to print my own photos, the black and white, until I mean, I would do it outside, you know, go to a studio because I didn't have room in my apartment. And I realized the acetic acid was really crappy from, you know, there wasn't enough ventilation, so I stopped doing that. Karen Warren and I have done a book of photographs of I don't know about Tool Tales. I will show you that. That I will find right now. Hang on. I forget when. It might have been at the beginning of COVID. Karen, I started taking photographs of my tools. Karen's been to my apartment too. She's from Australia. And in my old apartment, she liked some of the tools and said, why don't we do a book? You can photograph your tool and I'll write a story about it. I'll make up a story. And that's what happened. And an an Australian publisher put together. We want to do it again because we don't like the production is terrible. I don't want to tell this, but microfictions inspired by antique tools, and it actually won an award in Australia. So here, the photographs, unfortunately, the black and white, it's lousy printing. But here's something of mine, and and she wrote a story about it. She made a story up, and then at the end, then we had people. We explained what it was, what the tool was, and some of them we knew, and some of them people told us what they were. They found out. This thing I don't know if you can even see it, but it turns out it's some kind of a timer, a self-timer. But she did a little story for each tool. We did 10 of them and then we got bored. We got tired doing other things. So yeah, we were hoping to have she has a friend who's a designer who might redesign it for us and get better, hopefully do better prints of the photographs. So yeah, in that sense, we did that. But who has time? I mean, I mean, there are so many people who are such good photographers that I've given up in a way. I used to take photos in all the conventions I went to at parties, and I realized I wasn't enjoying the parties because I was busy behind the camera. And it's easier with a phone, but it's still, you're still taking the time from enjoying yourself. You're not living in the day. You're living behind the camera trying to, and so I stopped. And what I would do if I did it all, I would take a bunch of pictures at the beginning and then put the camera away. But, so I do have photographs, little books of snapshots before digital of years that I went to parties and things. I don't look at them much, but I've got them. And I have a couple of photographs. I have photographs that I've bought or been given of different types. I have some Japanese photographs from like the 40s and 30s. I have a couple. I have a few photographs, maybe only one of my own, not many.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with your point of view that nowadays is a digital phenomena that people, for instance, goes to a rock show and spend the whole night behind
and you don't really
telephone.
get the experience. Yeah.
No, and this is
so I stopped doing that.
It's quite, but sometimes I'm the only Waco alone with enjoying just the view through my eyes,
Right.
and all around the people I know.
Yeah.
But
yeah. But then I've also found, sometimes I'll shoot things. I put them on my Facebook page when I'm walking around, and they're nice photos. Some of them are okay. But then you see other people's photos and they're so much better. It's like, I can't compete with that. It's not a competition, but it's like, why bother? These photos are so much more beautiful, or so much more interesting.
yeah.
But
Yes.
again, I could never create art, but photography is like moving things around and seeing things. And I can do that. And that's similar to editing, using the material that's there and moving it around and seeing where it fits.
It's a great
And composing the photo.
It's a great approach. Yes, it's a good point of view. Okay, guys, who's next?
Emmanuel.
Emmanuel.
Bueno, la siguiente pregunta para Ellen es, ¿cuál es tu opinión sobre la literatura de género reciente escrita en América Latina? Y si has tenido la posibilidad de trabajar con alguno de estos autores o autoras.
Emmanuel said that if you have a opinion about the recent genre literature written in Latin America, and if you have the chance to work with any of these authors.
I would like to, but no, I haven't. I mean, the only thing I really acquire for now is Reactor, which is the website for tour.com. And I know there are people who specifically, I know Neil Clark at Strange Horizons specifically has been getting translations of stories. I don't have enough slots, in Reactor, they're like anyone who at tour can buy a story. And so we only have limited amounts that we can buy. So it's like I buy maybe 5 or 6 stories a year. So for that, no, it's like sometimes someone will contact me and said, "Hey, will you read this story?" And it depends on who they are. And I said, "Okay." Um, I think I would like to know more. I've been reading, various people have been sending me, I mean, I just got a Philippine anthology of like the best spec fiction. But again, it's like it's combining science fiction and fantasy and horror. And because I only have time really to read the horror, it's like, okay, I need the horror. Where's the rest? I don't want to read the rest of it. And I have seen Mexican. I think there was at least one anthology of Mexican horror that came out last year, or maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So when I see these things, this material, it's like, yeah, this is really good. Do these people write in English? Because I can't, to commission a translation is really difficult in the United States. I mean, when I was at OMNI, there was a Russian translator who contacted me and said, "Hey, would you publish a Russian story?" And it's like, well, maybe, she gave me like 5 summaries of 5 stories, which is really doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't tell you the style. I picked one, and then when she translated, it was so boring. I hated it. But another time, there was a Japanese translator, and that translator sent me 2 stories that were translated from Japanese, and I took both of them because they were really good by different writers. So if you have people who are writing in English, I might be interested. I certainly want to see what they're doing that's published already. If not a new story, I would definitely like to see what's going on in the field in short fiction where you live. If there are anthologies or collections, I would definitely like to see those or be made aware of them, and maybe the publisher can send me something so I can see what's out there. Yeah.
All right. Good point. I keep in mind.
Definitely. No, I want to see those. Yeah.
Okay.
And
Emmanuel?
not someone like Mariana Enriquez. They're mainstream, so you can't even get rights to them. I mean,
Yeah.
when you deal with a book publisher, you have to go to sub-rights, and they are horrible. They want too much money. It takes 6 months to get permission, and it's usually not. I don't take stories from Stephen King anymore, reprints. It's not worth the trouble because each foreign deal has to be separate. It's like, I don't have time to do this or the money. So, but yes, I would like to see work from people from Argentina and other places in South and Central America.
Good. Good. Emiliano, far away.
No, sigue Manuel.
Emmanuel, yes.
Bien, siguiente pregunta. ¿Qué autoras y autores noveles considera que están escribiendo en una dirección interesante actualmente y recomienda leerlos?
All right. Which new authors do you think are currently writing in an interesting direction, and would you recommend reading them?
All right. By the way, I don't know what, I think Willow Dawn Becker, I'm not sure, but I think her company's gone out of business, but I can't swear to it. I think it's her, just so you know. Hold on, let me take a look at what my most recent year's best. I can look at some of the table of contents of people who I think are writing really interesting. Oh, you know who's really writing? These are not necessarily new writers or even young writers, but they're people who I've become aware of who I think are really good. There's a writer, James Cooper, who's English. And he's been writing, I read his new collection last year, and it was really quite good. I mean, he writes, it's really I really like his work. It's like he writes a lot of noir stuff. It may be tinged with mystery, but I really like what he's been doing. And
James Cooper is the
James
name.
Cooper, yeah,
All right.
yeah. And I took a story by Primi Mohammed. She mostly writes novels and novellas, but she wrote a really good story called The Nightbirds last year that I liked a lot. And she's someone I never published before, although I think she's Canadian, but I can't remember. You want me to write down her name? And I'll put James Cooper too.
Yeah.
He's British. I mean, this year I think I had a lot of people who were British, only a handful of Americans, actually. Dan Coxon, who is a publisher, and he also writes stories. He had a collection out that was quite good. He's British, I think. Dan, Coxon. Hold on a second. What I'm gonna do is pull up my summary of the year so I can look at the collections here of some of the people who are writing what I think is great. All right, hold on. Gemma Amor, Amor.
Yes.
She's wrote a collection that was quite good. And Gemma Files, but she's been writing forever. She's terrific, Gemma Files. But Gemma
Right.
Amor is very good. She had a new collection out last year. All Who Wander Are Lost, Destination Horror Stories. It's quite. Oh, Eric LaRocca. Sometimes his work is very grotesque and creepy. He's gay, and some of his work is quite good. Laird Barron. Well, these are people who aren't always new. Laird Barron, but Laird has been very ill, so I don't think he's been writing much, but he's a terrific writer. Let's see. Oh, the collection by Dan Coxon was also Weird Little Worlds, Come Sing for the Harrowing. But I believe she's gone out of business. I think it's her that had problems. The James Cooper collection is from PS and it's called Glass Shatters First. He's British. He writes psychological and supernatural horror. And yeah.
All right.
I mean, there are others. I mean, there are other people who I publish regularly or once in a while who I think are quite interesting, writing great stuff.
Well, but
Yeah.
as now we have a good bunch of authors to bear in mind
Mhm.
in order to consider reading or to getting
Mhm.
the books. So Emiliano through Fernando next.
Yes, last question from Emiliano. En una entrevista, usted ha mencionado haber leído de niña Bullfinch Mythology o los libros de Edith Hamilton. ¿Cuáles son sus principales influencias por fuera de la esfera de lo fantástico?
In interviews, your credit reading Bullfinch Mythology and as a child, or books by Edith Hamilton. What were your main influences outside the fantasy realm?
Well, I consider them fantasy, though.
You
Mythology.
don't consider?
I do. I consider it
yeah.
fantasy. Yes. To me, that's fantasy. And I loved the Odyssey. I hated the Iliad. Too boring. But the Odyssey was magic. So I'm sorry, what was the question? More influences?
No, it's okay.
Yeah, so no, I read my parents had them in their house and I read them. And then I read a lot of Harlan Ellison. I loved his collections and I loved his Dangerous Visions and again Dangerous Visions. And as I said, Ray Bradbury. There's a wonderful book called The Playboy Book of Terror and the Supernatural, I think it's called. And it was an anthology of stories that Playboy published originally. And I didn't know anything about, I mean, I read it when I was a kid. I still have the paperback book. I don't know where I got it. And I finally got it in hardcover too. But it had Mr. Sardonicus, which was a famous novella, I think, by Ray Russell. It
Yes.
has a really excellent Ray Heavyset, which is like subtle and terrifying. And it had a Gay and Wilson story with no title. But I didn't know any of these people at the time, but I loved their stories, and reading that put me solidly into the horror, into horror. So yeah, I mean, I read those all as a young kid. And I read Lovecraft a lot. I read a lot of his stories, and that's when I started actually realizing the difference between horror and science fiction. I mean, horror was also, Lovecraft was emblematic of the fear of the unknown. Science fiction was the wonder of the unknown. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and it kind of separated my interests. I mean, I was interested in both. Don't ask me why I love horror. I have no idea. I can't tell you. People are asking, well, I don't know why I love horror, but I do.
Good, good, good.
Emanuel.
Emanuel, yes.
Ahí vamos. ¿Los subgéneros en la literatura de horror son los mismos con el paso del tiempo o hay alguna nueva tendencia que pienses que está cobrando fuerza actualmente?
Emmanuel said that have the genre in horror literature remain the same over the time, or are there any current trends you think are gaining traction?
Yes, unfortunately.
Oh yeah?
Well, yeah, I
Tell
mean,
me
I
that.
mentioned it. I mean, there's too much gothic, there's too much folk horror. There's too much I mean, one thing that's really easy is having children threatened and and parents and families. I mean, it's not novels, but I notice when I read a lot of stories, and novels too, that there's a certain type of story where people either they're either couples or not couples or family who go on vacation someplace to try to fix things and things get really bad. That was a very English trope for a while, a
Yes.
few years ago. And it's like, and it gets really boring after a while. It's like, no, I don't want to read about these people. I don't care about these people. They're horrible anyway. But it'll stop. I don't know why people are writing about that. And I think it's just, who knows? And then there are others where, children are a threat or children are the threat, monster children kind of thing. But as far as, well, of course, and there's dystopic things with politics, but that's different. There's always problematic things with politics and stuff. Yeah, and what's interesting, okay, what I've found, and I don't, is that some Mexican writers are writing novels that you are using the same tropes as European, I guess, and North American, but all they're doing is changing the culture. But to me, it's not enough. The changes aren't enough to make it different enough. It's like just because the vampire is Mexican doesn't make it an interesting story. And when it does, when they do something different with it, I read an interesting vampire novel. Hold on. That I did like. I think it was either Brazilian. It might have been Brazilian. Hang on a second. Let me see if I can find it easily. Okay. Sorry, I may find it, I may not. But it was interesting because it was a history of this vampire. There are some good vampire stories still. There always are some. Okay, here it is. First by Marina Yuschuk, translated by Heather Cleary. I think it was, Oh, well, it's about a vampire in the 19th century who emigrates from Europe to Buenos Aires and must learn to adapt. And she's an Argentinian writer. Have you heard of her?
Which is the name?
Marina,
Sorry?
I don't know how to pronounce it. Hold on, I'll put it in the chat. Check or something. Hold on.
Sí, Marina Susux.
And
yes.
And it was interesting
Oh,
because
yeah.
to me it did an interesting take on the vampire. It was from the vampire's point of view, not as a monster exactly, but how the vampire had to adapt over the centuries. To me, that was a good novel. That was an interesting vampire novel from a different culture, and I liked it. But many times they're just your plain old, okay, a vampire monster. By the way, you have to see Sinners. If you haven't seen Sinners, it's fabulous. The movie. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I don't remember what your question was. But too many of the same tropes are done. Okay, even when you change the culture, you still have to have a different point of view. It has to be different from what we read over and over again. I would very much prefer just taking a different take on the vampire, on what it does. I mean, there was a fun novel, American novel called So Thirsty by Rachel Harrison. That was it was about these two young women who get turned. One of them is a real bitch, sorry. And she's really obnoxious throughout most of the thing, and she's totally wild, has no control. But it's also extremely sexy, and I really liked it. It was funny to, it was done really well. And to me, it's so rare to find new vampire novels that just do something different that interest me. It's like these vampires were a family, and they've been around, hundreds of thousands of years or whatever. And so the woman who's from the point of view is like they need to learn how to become vampires. One is changed into a vampire because she died, so they saved her life. And then the other friend decided, okay, do it to me too, whatever. But then the one who was originally turned, the wild one, doesn't care. She'll just kill people. She doesn't care. But the other one is like, I don't want to do this. It's like, let's run away. Let's go away. I don't want these people. I don't trust these people. These vampires who made us vampires. I want to go away. And it shows how they really screw things up and eventually have to go back to the family and accept the woman who didn't want to be a vampire accepts that, yeah, this is what she is, and she has to deal with it one way or another. And I just enjoyed that one. That was called So Thirsty by Rachel Harrison.
Yes, I would like to add, if I may, I do remember a movie about zombies. They have plenty of zombie, is a zombification a state of life. But in this case, I remember the two main characters was an police officer, a woman, that is in his last day before shore leave for pregnancy, for delivering the boy or the child, I don't know what was. And the other main character was some regular, an average Joe that suffer from, pepper spray in the eye. So he was in an ambulance, and suddenly the zombie apocalypse turned over all the people. So it was funny to see, interesting to see how this character, one pregnant woman and a blind man, is dealing with the zombie attack.
Right.
So
Was this
it
a movie
was,
or a book? This was a movie?
I don't know. I saw a movie, And I really appreciate this. Some kind of a Class B movie. I don't remember. I guess is German or Canadian or something like that, or even American. I don't know, but it's not one of the hot shot of the year a couple of years ago, and it was in one of the platforms. And I was searching all the same stuff. A couple or trying to start fresh and going outside or upper state and buy a new house, and in the basement has all this the same stuff after all the movies. But in this case, it attract my attention the way they deal or recount the narrative of the zombie narratives, and the dealing with a couple of impaired people, because one is a woman about delivering, and the other is a blind man. And it was interesting. It was a refresh in the subject. So that's I understand your point of view and your approach. It's always the same story, but it doesn't matter
it's the treatment of it.
Yes, it doesn't matter the what, but the how. Yes.
Did you read or see The Girl with All the Gifts?
Excuse me?
The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey.
No,
it's about a young woman.
I'm afraid not.
It's a young girl who the zombieism is caused by fungus, but she's in school and they try to train her to not shoot people. And I mean, it's really good. I mean, both the movie and the novel are excellent. Yeah.
Okay, I bear in mind.
I highly recommend that. Hold on, let me.
Well, Emmanuel, our last question for the day.
Bien, esta es la última pregunta, tiene una introducción un poco larga. Ellen, ¿has sido responsable de ampliar el espectro de lo que una historia de horror puede contener? ¿Has editado autores y autoras que no pertenecían específicamente al canon de la literatura de horror, como por ejemplo Joyce Carol Oates, y has acercado sus trabajos a un público lector que tal vez no los hubiera leído de otra forma? ¿Cómo ves el vínculo entre la literatura de género y el resto de la literatura de ficción en el mercado norteamericano?
All right. The question have a very interesting introduction that Emmanuel said, you have been responsible for broadening what a horror story can contain or should contain. You have published authors who did not specifically belong to the horror literature canon, such as Joyce Carol Oates, and you have brought their work to a readership that might not have read it otherwise. And here is the question. How do you see the connection between genre literature and the rest of fiction in the North American market?
I think that it's all the same. I mean, I think that horror has always been sold as mainstream. I mean, you can find horror traditionally, and before they were separated out, there were things being published that weren't called horror, from Frankenstein or Dracula. I mean, they were classics. I mean, part of my aim when I do reprint anthologies anyway is to get people who may not be known to the general public as horror writers, but show that they have written horror. I mean, it goes both ways, okay? Horror writers get all bent out of shape when you say that this person writes horror. like not Joyce, because she's already been embraced by both horror and non-horror people. But there are writers who, say, that's not horror. That's not horror. Yes, it is. Look, to me, it is. And then people who are in the mainstream get all upset. They don't want to be called horror writers. So it goes both ways. This veil that should be permeable, that is permeable. But, the genres and the non-genre, well, to me, mainstream is a genre too, but they're trying to hold off from each other. It's like, oh no, you can't call it that. I mean, a lot more right now, a lot more American publishers are starting new horror imprints. But again, to me, is it horror or is it dark fantasy? It's like, I mean, I just looked at a catalog I just sent from Run With It, which is the new, I think it's called that. It's like in the Orbit imprint for horror. And none of the books they mentioned sound like horror. They sound like dark fantasy. It's like, I don't want to see any of them. I don't care.
Mhm.
So, I mean, people get on the bandwagon and say, oh yeah, let's publish horror, but they don't really understand what horror is, which if it brings more readers in, okay. But I think people who are horror readers will be disappointed in those books. I mean, I would never read any of those books, as a horror reader. But yeah, I mean, part of my job I've always felt since I was at OMNI that I want people, William Burroughs, I mean, he published horror stuff, he published science fiction, and I was happy to be able to publish him in OMNI. It's like I would deliberately go after these writers who are not known. When I was at OMNI, we did less and less whole stories in the magazine. We didn't have room. So what I did, I started a groupings of stories, of short shorts, what now we call flash fiction, like 5 stories under 1,000 words. And I was able to commission T. Corrigus and Boyle to do a story. It was science fiction rather than horror. But Joyce Carol Oates, her first story was for me for that. Patricia Highsmith, the mystery writer, I got her to write for me. I mean, the stories weren't great, but they were okay, and I was happy to get their names in the book, in the magazine, because that's like, oh wow, I'm publishing Patricia Highsmith, and I mean, it goes for not only science fiction but horror. It's all over the place. That's what Terry and I started when we did the year's best fantasy and horror. We both took things. Fantasy, especially, is all over the place. Horror, maybe not as much, but you find gems of horror in the New Yorker, sometimes. And sometimes you can't get permission to use them. That's possible also. Sometimes, I mean, I wanted to buy a John Connolly, who's an Irish writer who is a
Yes.
mystery writer, but publishes supernatural stuff occasionally. And I wanted a story of his that he published in Black Static, and I couldn't get permission from the publisher controlled the rights. And, John Connolly is not, even though he writes Gesundheit, even though he writes ghost stories, he's not considered a horror writer. And it would have been great to be able to get his name out there and his work out there so horror people could see it. So I think that in a way has been part of my job, to expand the idea of what is horror, and definitely psychological horror. I mean, Psycho is psychological horror, it doesn't always have to be supernatural. And that's always part of my goal. If I have an agenda at all, it's to kill the boundaries, some of the boundaries. I mean, I'm still on dark fantasy versus horror, still there. It's still a boundary as far as I'm concerned. But as far as mainstream versus genre, there should be no boundaries. I don't think.
Okay. Bueno,
Does that answer the
Fernando?
question? Kind of?
Yes.
Yes, it was the last question.
Antes de terminar la
Fernando?
entrevista, agradeciéndole el tiempo a Ellen Datlow, agradeciéndole la paciencia, todo lo que nos ha contado, todo lo que ha hablado, todo lo que nos ha revelado también sobre el mundillo de la edición. Yo quiero saber el nombre del gato de Ellen Datlow. Necesito saber el nombre.
Good point. Me too, because all the writers and editors has a history with the cats. Fernando said that before saying goodbye and thanks you for your time, your generosity, open literally your home and your bookcase to your knowledge and your experience to us. Fernando wants to know the name of the cat.
This one's Jack. He's Jack the Jerk.
Jack the Jerk.
He's a
Oh.
jerk. He's horrible. He's a monster, and he's very large, and he knocking things. He's always very wants a tiny bites. I have another one, a little one. My little one, who's not here, is a tabby with white paws and a white face. Her name is Sophie, and Jack is about 6. You know, here he's sitting. He's lying next to me. He knocks things over if they're in his way. But yeah, here, Jack, do you want to pose? Do you want me to pick you up? No, I can't lift you. So Jack,
Okay,
yeah.
Jack. The Jack. Okay, Fernando.
Bien, entonces
closing
terminamos la entrevista. Le doy muchísimas gracias a Ellen Datlow de mi parte, de Emiliano, que lamentablemente tiene problemas con el audio, de parte de Emiliano y mía, y también de Manuel. No sé si él quiere decir algo más. Agradecerle muchísimo, muchísimo todo el tiempo que nos ha dado y cómo se ha abierto hacia nosotros. Muchísimas gracias.
Emiliano, excuse me, Fernando said that on behalf of himself and Emiliano, who have this mic trouble, and Emmanuel, all me myself, we all want to express our thanks, deeply thanks to your time, your generosity, your capacity to put in just a little cup of poison the whole thing of the publishing and editing business, and recommended new authors, and giving us a very precisely view of what is behind the curtain of the publishing or the book industry, in the sense of the publishing and editing a work. So once
Thank you for
again,
having me on. Thank you.
thank you very much. You were so generous, and we really enjoy the time with you. And I'm pretty sure that all our audience
Stay in touch, please.
will love your wisdom, your experience, and your sense of humor to deal with
Yes.
this, stuff where people say used to think that the horror writer or the horror editors, we have all people with issues, and it's not the it's not the true, but sometimes yes, but not all of us. So once again, thank you very much indeed. I promise I will let you know when I'm gonna be to the big city. I spend a lot of time over there. So thank you very much, and I hope we will see you again pretty soon. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you
From
so
the deep
much.
of our heart.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, gente.